I found the receipt wedged between 2 pages of Margie's choir folder, and my stomach dropped like a stone into cold water. The paper was wrinkled coffee-stained, but the numbers were clear as daylight, $847.50, for what looked like medical equipment dated 3 weeks ago. The same week, our choir's charity fund was supposedly cleaned out for administrative expenses. I set my coffee mug down on the church kitchen counter, with shaking hands, the ceramic clink echoing in the empty room. "Elena, you're here early." Pastor Ruth's voice made me jump. She stood in the doorway, arms full of sheet music, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light. "Margie asked you to help with the books, didn't she?" "Yes, she did." I folded the receipt and slipped it into my jacket pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Just trying to get organized for tonight's meeting." Ruth nodded, but I caught the worry lines around her eyes. Our St. Mark's Community Choir had been her pride and joy for 12 years, ever since she'd taken over as director. The annual Christmas charity concert was her baby, and this year we were supposed to raise money for the children's cancer ward at Methodist Hospital. "How are the numbers looking?" she asked, setting the music on the counter beside me. I opened my mouth and closed it. The Excel spreadsheet on my laptop showed a balance of $3,247 in our charity account, but the bank statements told a different story. "I'm still working through everything," I said finally. "Margie's been so stressed lately," Ruth said, lowering her voice. "Her husband's treatments have been rough. Tom's a fighter, but the chemo just wipes him out." The receipt in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. Tom Morrison, Margie's husband of 38 years, the man who used to run sound for our concerts until the cancer diagnosis 6 months ago. I'd watched Margie's face grow more drawn with each passing week, seen the way she clutched her phone during rehearsal breaks, checking messages from doctors and insurance companies. "I should probably get these organized before everyone arrives," I said, gesturing at the scattered papers. "Of course. And Elena." Ruth paused at the door. "Thank you for stepping up. I know choir bookkeeping isn't exactly glamorous, but with your library background and attention to detail, you're exactly what we need." After she left, I sat back down and stared at the laptop screen. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole story either. 3 months ago, when Margie had asked for volunteers to help with fundraising coordination, I'd raised my hand without thinking. Fresh off my divorce from David, I needed something to throw myself into, and I'd always been good with spreadsheets. What I hadn't expected was to discover that our treasurer, who'd been handling choir finances for 15 years, had been moving money around like a shell game. The church basement started filling up around 6:30. Our Tuesday night rehearsals were the highlight of my week had been ever since I'd joined the choir 2 years ago, during the worst of the divorce proceedings. There's something about 43 voices blending together that makes you forget for a few hours about lawyers and custody schedules and starting over at 52. Elena, sweetheart. Dolores Martinez swept over to me, her alto voice carrying evening conversation. At 67, she was the unofficial social coordinator of our group, the one who remembered every birthday and anniversary. "How's the number crunching going? Please tell me we're not broke. Still working on it," I said, forcing a smile. Dolores had been my lifeline during the divorce, the one who'd insisted I come to choir practice even when I wanted to hide under my covers forever. The thought of disappointing her made my chest tight. "Well, whatever you find, we'll figure it out," she said, patting my arm. "That's what we do here." Margie arrived a few minutes later, looking pale and tired. She'd lost weight over the summer, and her usually perfect silver bob was a little unkempt. She caught my eye across the room and walked over her smile, not quite reaching her eyes. "Elena, did you get a chance to look at those spreadsheets I emailed you?" "I did." I kept my voice neutral. "I have a few questions, though. Maybe we could talk after rehearsal." Something flickered across her face. "Questions about what?" "Just some of the transactions. Nothing urgent." Margie nodded, but I noticed how she twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. "Of course. Though I should mention Tom has a late appointment tomorrow, so I might need to leave right after we finish." "That's fine. We can talk Thursday." Pastor Ruth called us to order, and for the next 90 minutes, I lost myself in the music. We were working on a challenging arrangement of "O Holy Night" for the Christmas concert, and the soaring harmonies required all my concentration. But every time we took a break, I felt the receipt in my pocket like a weight. Frank Kowalski, our lead tenor, slid into the empty chair beside me during the last water break. He'd joined the choir 6 months after his wife died, and we'd struck up a tentative friendship over shared experiences of life upheaval. "You look troubled," he said quietly. Frank had a way of noticing things, probably from 30 years of teaching high school math. "Just tired," I said. "Long day at the library." He studied my face with those steady brown eyes. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm around. Sometimes an outside perspective helps." Before I could respond, Ruth called us back. As we filed into formation, I caught Margie watching me from across the room. When our eyes met, she looked away quickly. After rehearsal, I lingered while people packed up their music. Margie was one of the first to leave, citing Tom's early morning doctor appointment. I watched her hurry toward the parking lot, then pulled out my phone and called my daughter Sarah. "Mom, it's almost 10, Sarah said instead of hello. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just leaving choir practice. How's work?" "Crazy busy but good. Did you call just to check in, or is something wrong? You sound weird." I walked to my car keys jingling in my hand. Sarah had always been able to read my moods, even from Cincinnati. "I think I might have stumbled into something at church. Nothing dangerous," I added quickly. "Just complicated." "Mom, you're being cryptic. What kind of complicated?" I got in my car and locked the doors, suddenly feeling paranoid. "Financial stuff. I think someone's been taking money from the charity fund." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Mom, please tell me you're not about to turn into some kind of amateur detective." "I'm not. I just don't know what to do. This person, she's been going through a really hard time. Her husband has cancer. That doesn't give her the right to steal from charity." Sarah's voice was firm. "You have to report it. It's not that simple. These people are my friends. They helped me through the divorce. And if I'm wrong..." "Are you wrong?" I thought about the bank statements, the receipts, the careful way Margie had been deflecting my questions. "No, I don't think I am." "Then you know what you have to do." After I hung up, I sat in the church parking lot for another 20 minutes, watching the last few cars pull away. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves from somewhere nearby. Through the basement windows, I could see the janitor, Mr. Peterson, cleaning up after our rehearsal. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files again. The numbers were all there, a pattern of small withdrawals disguised as legitimate expenses. Office supplies that never appeared. Equipment rentals that didn't match any invoices. It was subtle, clever, and it would have gone unnoticed if Margie hadn't gotten sick last month and asked for help. The receipt in my pocket was dated September 28th. I cross-referenced it with our bank records. Sure enough, there was a withdrawal on September 27th for costume supplies in almost the exact same amount. I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past the houses where many of my choir friends lived. Dolores's porch light was still on, and I could see the blue flicker of her television through the front window. 3 blocks over Frank's house was dark, except for the upstairs bedroom window. My own house felt too quiet when I walked in. I'd been living alone for 8 months now, ever since the divorce was finalized, and I still wasn't used to the silence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with the laptop and the receipts spread out in front of me. The money Margie had taken totaled almost $6,000 over 3 months. Not a fortune, but enough to seriously impact our ability to make a meaningful donation to the children's cancer ward. I thought about the kids in those hospital beds, the families struggling with medical bills, and felt a familiar anger rise in my chest. But then I thought about Margie's face, the way she'd looked when she talked about Tom's treatments, the way she'd apologized almost in tears when she'd had to miss rehearsal for another doctor appointment. I went to bed without reaching any conclusions, but I slept poorly. In my dreams, I was standing in front of the choir trying to explain why our charity concert had been cancelled, while 42 faces stared at me in disappointment. Thursday morning, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, and the library's quiet efficiency felt like too much to handle. Instead, I drove to the park where I used to take Sarah when she was little before the divorce, Before everything got so complicated, the playground was mostly empty, except for a young mother pushing her toddler on the swings. I sat on a bench and watched them, remembering when life felt simpler, when right and wrong were clearly defined, and I didn't have to choose between loyalty and justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Dolores. "Coffee this afternoon, need to talk choir business." I texted back, "Sure, Mulligan's at 2. Mulligan's Cafe was our usual spot, a local place that served oversized muffins and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Dolores was already there when I arrived, sitting in our regular booth by the window. She'd ordered me a caramel latte, another one of her thoughtful gestures that made me feel even worse about what I had to do. "You look terrible," she said without preamble. "What's going on?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, buying time. "How long have you known Margie?" "About 8 years since, right after I joined the choir." "Why? What do you think of her, honestly?" Dolores frowned. "Elena, you're scaring me. Did something happen?" "Just answer the question, please." "Margie's a good woman. A little uptight sometimes, very organized, very dedicated to the choir. She and Tom have been through hell with his cancer diagnosis, but she's handling it with grace. She's never missed a payment, never let us down financially." Dolores paused. "Why are you asking me this?" I pulled the receipt from my purse and set it on the table between us. "Because I found this in her choir folder." Dolores picked it up, adjusted her reading glasses, and went very still. When she looked up, her face was pale. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Tucked between pages in her music folder. I was helping her organize for the fundraising meeting like she asked. This could be for anything. Maybe she was just keeping track of Tom's medical expenses." "Dolores, look at the date. Then look at this." I opened my laptop and showed her the bank statement. Same amount, same time frame. And it's not the only one. For 10 minutes, I walked her through the pattern of withdrawals, the matching receipts I'd found, the careful way the thefts had been disguised. Dolores sat in silence, her coffee growing cold, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. "How much?" she asked finally. "Almost 6,000 over 3 months. "Jesus," Dolores rubbed her temples. "What are you going to do?" "I was hoping you'd help me figure that out." She was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the afternoon traffic. Finally, she said, "You know, my mother had cancer when I was in my 40s. Lung cancer caught too late. Even with insurance, the bills were crushing. We lost the house." "Dolores, I'm not saying what Margie did was right, but I understand how it happens. You get desperate, you start thinking about what matters most, and everything else becomes negotiable. What about the children at the hospital, the families counting on our donation?" "I know." Dolores's voice was heavy. "I know you're right, but Margie's been my friend for 8 years. She helped plan my retirement party. She brought casseroles when I had my knee surgery. How do I destroy that?" "By remembering that real friendship means holding each other accountable." We sat in silence while the afternoon crowd filled the cafe around us. Students from the community college, mothers with strollers, a few retirees reading newspapers and discussing local politics. Normal people living normal lives, not wrestling with impossible choices. "What if we talked to her first?" Dolores said finally. "Gave her a chance to come clean, maybe work out a payment plan." "You think she'd agree to that?" "I think she'd do anything to avoid having this come out publicly. The shame would kill her, Elena. And Tom doesn't need that stress right now." I thought about it. It felt like a reasonable compromise, though something in my gut warned me it might not be that simple. "Okay, but if she refuses or if she tries to deflect again, then we take it to Pastor Ruth." We agreed to approach Margie together after Sunday service in the church library, where we could have privacy. It seemed like the right thing to do, giving her a chance to explain and make things right before involving church leadership. But Saturday night, everything changed. I was making dinner when my phone rang. Pastor Ruth's name on the caller ID made my stomach lurch. "Elena, I'm so sorry to call this late, but I need to ask you something about the charity fund." "What about it?" "I just got off the phone with the hospital. They're planning the dedication ceremony for our donation, and they need to know the final amount we'll be presenting. I told them I'd check with you since you've been working on the books." My mouth went dry. "What dedication ceremony?" For the new family comfort room in the children's cancer ward, the one our donation is funding. They want to put up a plaque acknowledging St. Mark's Community Choir, and they need the exact dollar amount for the dedication. It's scheduled for next Friday. I sank into a kitchen chair. Ruth, I think there might be a problem with the fund balance. Silence on the other end. Then, what kind of problem? I'd rather explain in person. Can we meet tomorrow before service? Elena, you're frightening me. How bad is it? I closed my eyes. Bad enough that we might not be able to make the donation at all. Ruth's sharp intake of breath was audible. I'll be in my office at 8 tomorrow morning. After I hung up, I called Dolores. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. The hospital called Ruth, I said without preamble. There's going to be a dedication ceremony next Friday for a family comfort room. Our donation was supposed to fund it. Oh no, they want to put up a plaque with the exact amount of our contribution. Ruth's expecting me to have the final numbers tomorrow morning. What are you going to tell her? The truth. I have to, Dolores. This isn't just about missing money anymore. There are families at that hospital counting on what we promised. Dolores was quiet for a moment. I'll be there with you. 8 o'clock. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. We're in this together now. Sunday morning arrived grey and drizzly, matching my mood. I drove to church through empty streets, arriving at 7:45 to find Pastor Ruth's car already in the parking lot. Through her office window, I could see her sitting at her desk, shoulders tense. Dolores pulled up just as I was getting out of my car. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Ready? She asked. No, but let's do it anyway. Ruth's office smelled like coffee and the lavender soap she always used. She'd spread papers across her desk, including printouts of our choir's previous donations and correspondence with the hospital. When she looked up, her face was grim. Tell me, she said simply. I opened my laptop and showed her everything. The bank statements, the pattern of withdrawals, the receipts I'd found. Ruth listened in silence, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just absorbing the scope of what had happened. You're certain it was Margie? She asked finally. As certain as I can be without actually seeing her make the transactions. Ruth leaned back in her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. $6,000. That's half of what we promised the hospital. I know. And the ceremony is Friday. I know. Ruth was quiet for several minutes, staring at the papers on her desk. Finally, she said, I have to ask you both something, and I need complete honesty. Have either of you talked to Margie about this? Dolores and I exchanged glances. We were planning to approach her today, Dolores said. After service. We thought she deserved a chance to explain. And if she denies it, then we'd bring it to you, I said. Ruth nodded slowly. I appreciate that impulse. I really do. But this situation has moved beyond what the three of us can handle privately. The hospital is expecting a specific donation amount, and we're obligated to be honest about what we can actually provide. What are you saying? Dolores asked. I'm saying I have to involve the church board, and probably the police. The word police hung in the air, like a physical presence. I thought about Margie's pale face, her worried eyes, Tom's battle with cancer. But I also thought about the families at the hospital, the children who needed that comfort room. When I asked, I'll call an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Elena, I'll need you to present your findings. Can you do that? My hands were shaking, but I nodded. Yes, and I'll need to speak with Margie before the meeting. This can't blindside her. After we left Ruth's office, Dolores and I sat in my car in the church parking lot. Early service attendees were beginning to arrive, families with small children, elderly couples, walking slowly from the parking lot. I feel like I'm going to throw up, Dolores said. Me too. Do you think we should warn her, call her before Ruth does? I thought about it. No, that wouldn't be fair to Ruth, and it might give Margie time to, I don't know, destroy evidence or something. You really think she'd do that? I don't know what she'd do. A week ago, I would have said she'd never steal from charity either. We sat in silence watching people file into the church. Frank Kowalski walked past, probably heading to warm up the sound system for service. He caught sight of us through my windshield and waved. I managed a weak wave back. Are you going to stay for service? Dolores asked. I don't think I can. Sitting there singing about grace and forgiveness, while knowing what's coming this afternoon. I understand. Should I stay and keep an eye on things? Probably. See if Margie acts any differently. Though I suppose after Ruth talks to her, everything will be different anyway. I drove home and spent the morning refining my presentation for the board meeting. Charts, timelines, copies of receipts, everything laid out as clearly as possible. I kept thinking about my years working as a paralegal before Sarah was born, how I'd learned to present facts without emotion, to let the evidence speak for itself. By noon, I still hadn't eaten anything, but my stomach was too knotted to handle food. I made coffee instead and sat at my kitchen table rehearsing what I would say to the board. My phone rang at 12:30. Dolores. She didn't come to service, she said without preamble. What? Margie. She wasn't there. Ruth made the announcement that there would be an emergency board meeting this afternoon to discuss financial matters, but Margie never showed up. Did Ruth talk to her? I don't know. Ruth looked pretty shaken during the service, but she didn't say anything specific. Maybe Margie's at the hospital with Tom. Maybe, or maybe she knows what's coming. After I hung up, I tried calling Margie myself. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The emergency board meeting was held in the church conference room at 3 o'clock. 7 people around a rectangular table, Pastor Ruth, myself, 4 board members I knew by sight, but not well, and Bob Henderson, the church treasurer. The atmosphere was tense from the moment we sat down. Ruth explained the situation in broad terms, then asked me to present my findings. For 20 minutes I walked them through everything, the discrepancies in the books, the pattern of withdrawals, the matching receipts. The board members asked pointed questions, their faces growing more serious with each answer. Have you spoken with Mrs. Morrison about these allegations? Asked Janet Carlisle, the board secretary. I attempted to reach her this morning, Ruth said. She didn't answer her phone and she wasn't at service today. That's not necessarily suspicious, said Tom Bradley, the oldest board member. Her husband's health situation. The question, interrupted Bob Henderson, is what we do now. The hospital is expecting a donation of $12,000. We have $6,000, and we have what appears to be evidence of embezzlement. The word sounded harsh in the quiet room. Embezzlement. Not borrowing or misunderstanding or any of the gentler terms I'd been using in my head. We need to contact the authorities, said Janet. If money has been stolen, it's a police matter. Margie Morrison has been a member of this church for 20 years, said Tom Bradley. Her family has been through hell these past 6 months. Maybe we should approach this with some compassion. Compassion for whom? Bob asked. What about the families at the hospital who are counting on our donation? What about the other choir members who worked hard to raise that money? The debate continued for another hour. In the end, pragmatism won. Ruth was authorized to contact the police, and I was asked to compile all my evidence for investigation. The board would meet again the following Tuesday to discuss how to handle the hospital donation and whether to proceed with the Christmas concert. As we filed out of the conference room, Janet Carlisle pulled me aside. I know this was difficult for you, she said, but you did the right thing. I wanted to believe her, but as I drove home through the darkening afternoon, all I felt was tired and sad. Monday morning, I called in sick to work again. I couldn't face the cheerful normalcy of the library, the patrons asking for help, finding romance novels and tax forms. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at my phone. At 10:30 it rang. Ruth, the police want to interview you this afternoon, she said. Detective Morrison, no relation to Margie, will be at the church at 2 o'clock. Okay. Elena, I also want you to know that Margie called me this morning. She wants to meet. My stomach flipped. What did you tell her? That it was too late for private conversations. I advised her to contact a lawyer. How did she sound? Scared and angry. She said she couldn't believe that people she trusted would betray her like this. The irony wasn't lost on me. When is she meeting with the police? Tomorrow morning. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Is there any chance you could be wrong about this? Any possibility that there's an innocent explanation? I closed my eyes thinking about the receipts, the bank statements, The careful pattern of withdrawals disguised as legitimate expenses. No, I don't think so. I was afraid you'd say that. Detective Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She asked detailed questions about the bookkeeping discrepancies, took copies of all my documentation, and listened carefully as I explained how I discovered the pattern of thefts. You mentioned that Mrs. Morrison's husband is undergoing cancer treatment, she said near the end of our interview. Yes, it's been very expensive from what I understand. That could be relevant to motive. Financial pressure, medical bills, insurance gaps. She made notes on her pad. It doesn't excuse theft, but it might explain it. After the detective left, I sat in the empty church conference room for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 4 days, I'd gone from happily helping with choir finances to potentially sending a friend to jail. Frank found me there 20 minutes later. Pastor Ruth said you might still be here, he said, settling into the chair across from me. How are you holding up? I honestly don't know. Want to talk about it? I looked at his face, lined with the kind of grief I recognized from my own mirror during the worst days of my divorce. Frank had lost his wife of 28 years to a heart attack, sudden and devastating. If anyone understood impossible choices and their consequences, it was him. I keep wondering if I could have handled this differently, I said. Maybe if I'd approached Margie privately, first given her a chance to explain. You think she would have admitted it? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe she would have just gotten better at hiding it. Frank was quiet for a moment, considering. When Linda died, I had to make a lot of decisions about her care in those final weeks. The doctors kept offering options treatments that might buy us a few more months, but would have made her miserable. I had to choose between hope and comfort, between fighting and letting go. That's different. Is it? Sometimes doing the right thing feels like betrayal. Sometimes protecting one person means failing another. He leaned forward. The question isn't whether your choice was perfect. The question is whether you can live with it. That evening, Dolores called. I ran into Margie at the grocery store, she said. She looked awful, like she hadn't slept in days. Did she say anything? She asked me how I could do this to her, how I could side with a stranger against a friend. What did you tell her? That you weren't a stranger, that you were trying to protect the charity and the hospital, and yes, her too. That letting this continue would have been worse for everyone. Did she listen? I think she heard me, but I don't think she believed me. Dolores, do you regret it, supporting me, I mean? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, ask me again in 6 months, when we know how this all turns out. Tuesday's board meeting was smaller and more focused. Margie had been arrested that morning on charges of embezzlement and was out on bail pending trial. The story had made the local newspaper's online edition a brief item about a church treasurer charged with stealing charity funds. The hospital has been understanding about the donation shortfall, Ruth reported. They're willing to accept whatever we can provide and hold the dedication ceremony when we're ready. What about the Christmas concert? Asked Janet. We proceed as planned. The choir needs normalcy and the community is expecting it. We'll make the best donation we can with what we have. And Margie's position as treasurer, obviously she's been removed from all financial responsibilities. Bob will handle choir finances going forward. After the meeting, Ruth asked me to stay behind. The choir is meeting tomorrow night, she said. I know this is going to be difficult, but I hope you'll be there. People are going to have questions, and you're the one person who can explain what really happened. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Elena, 42 people are going to walk into that rehearsal room tomorrow night, wondering if their choir is falling apart. They need to see that we're going to get through this. You were the one who discovered the problem, and you were brave enough to do something about it. Let them see that courage. Wednesday night, I almost turned around 3 times on the drive to church. But I thought about Frank's words about living with my choices, and I forced myself to park and walk into the basement. The rehearsal room was full, but the usual pre-practice chatter was subdued. Conversation stopped when I walked in, and I felt 42 pairs of eyes tracking my movement to my usual seat in the alto section. Dolores saved me by standing up and clearing her throat. I think we all know why this feels different tonight, she said. And I think we all have questions. Pastor Ruth is going to explain what happened, and then Elena is going to tell us what she found, and why she felt she had to report it. And then we're going to decide together how we move forward. Ruth explained the situation clearly and honestly: the missing money, the investigation, Margie's arrest. The room was completely silent, the kind of quiet that amplifies every small sound: the hum of the fluorescent lights, someone's jacket rustling, the whistle of wind through the basement windows. When she finished, all eyes turned to me. I stood up on shaking legs. "I know some of you are angry with me," I began, "and I understand that. Margie has been part of this choir for 15 years. She's been a friend to many of you and a good treasurer until—" I paused, searching for the right words. "Until her family's medical crisis made her desperate." "Why didn't you talk to her first?" called out someone from the tenor section. "Why go straight to the pastor?" I was planning to, but when I found out about the hospital dedication ceremony, about the families counting on our donation, I realized this was bigger than just choir business. There were children involved, real people who needed that money we'd promised. $6,000, said Mary Chen from the soprano section. That's what she took. Over 3 months, yes. And Tom's cancer treatments. I can't speak to their specific financial situation, but yes, I believe that's where the money went. Frank stood up from the tenor section. "I have a question for everyone here," he said. "How many of us have been in situations where we felt desperate, where we thought about doing things we never imagined we'd consider?" A few hands went up hesitantly, then a few more. "I'm not saying what Margie did was right," Frank continued, "but I am saying that most of us are probably closer to that kind of desperation than we'd like to admit. Elena did what she had to do to protect the charity and the hospital. But that doesn't mean we can't have compassion for Margie and Tom." The discussion that followed was raw and honest. Some people were angry at Margie for betraying their trust. Others were angry at me for exposing her. But gradually, a consensus emerged: we would continue. As a choir, we would support both the hospital charity and Margie's family in whatever ways we could, and we would try to heal from this together. "There's one more thing," Ruth said as the meeting wound down. "Elena has offered to resign from her volunteer treasurer duties. But I'm asking you all to consider whether that's really what we want. She discovered a problem that could have gotten much worse, and she had the courage to address it properly. Those are exactly the qualities we need in someone handling our finances." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. I would continue helping with the choir's books, with additional oversight from the church board. As people began to pack up their music, several choir members approached me. Some thanked me for doing the difficult thing. Others expressed sympathy for the impossible position I'd been put in. A few, I noticed, avoided eye contact and left quickly. Frank lingered until most people had gone. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I've been hit by a truck, but also lighter somehow, like I can finally breathe again. That's what doing the right thing feels like, even when it's hard." "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think Margie will ever forgive me?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think Margie is going to spend a lot of time being angry at everyone, you the board herself. God, the cancer that put her family in this position. But eventually, if she's honest, she'll recognize that you probably saved her from something much worse." "What do you mean?" "If this had continued much longer, if more money had been taken, the charges would have been felony level. As it stands, her lawyer might be able to work out a plea deal with restitution and community service. You may have actually done her a favor, even if she can't see it now." 3 weeks later, the newspaper ran a follow-up story. Margie had pleaded guilty to misdemeanor theft and was sentenced to 2 years of probation and full restitution to the church. Tom's cancer was responding well to treatment, and the family had set up a payment plan for the stolen money. The Christmas concert was held as scheduled 3 weeks before Christmas in the church sanctuary. We raised almost $8,000, which, combined with what remained in our account, allowed us to make a $10,000 donation to the children's cancer ward. The dedication ceremony for the family comfort room was held in January, with a plaque acknowledging the contribution from St. Mark's Community Choir. I never spoke to Margie again. She and Tom transferred their membership to a church across town, which was probably best for everyone involved. But I did run into her once 6 months later at the farmer's market downtown. She looked better, healthier, less drawn. Tom was with her, his hair growing back from the chemo, both of them examining a display of early spring vegetables. When she saw me, she tensed for a moment. Then, to my surprise, she walked over. "Elena," she said quietly, "I wanted to say something to you." I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for the confrontation I'd been dreading. "I wanted to say thank you." I stared at her, speechless. "I know that sounds crazy," she continued, "but my lawyer told me that if I'd kept taking money, if the amount had gotten higher, I would have been looking at felony charges. Prison time. You stopped me before I destroyed my life completely. Margie, I'm not saying I'm grateful for how it all happened. The humiliation, the way it all came out, that was horrible. But you probably saved me from something much worse." We stood there in the bright spring sunshine, surrounded by the sounds of the busy market, two middle-aged women who had been friends and were now something more complicated. "How is Tom?" I asked finally. "Good, in remission. The doctors are optimistic." She paused. "We're getting the finances back on track, slowly, but we're managing." "I'm glad." "Elena, I know I can't undo what I did, but if I could go back, if I could handle the stress and fear differently. We all make choices we regret when we're scared." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Take care of yourself, and thank you for stopping me before I went too far." As I watched her walk back to Tom, who was pretending not to watch our conversation, I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't even known was there. The guilt I'd been carrying, the second-guessing, the wondering if I'd destroyed a friendship for nothing, all of it lifted like morning fog, burning off in sunlight. That night, I called Sarah in Cincinnati. "Mom, you sound different," she said after I'd told her about the encounter with Margie. "Different how? Lighter, like you're finally okay with everything that happened." "I think I am. It took me a while to understand that I didn't betray a friend. I helped her find her way back from a mistake that could have ruined her life. And you protected the people who needed that charity money." "That too. The St. Mark's Community Choir is still going strong. We've added several new members, including a young mother whose kids are in the church's nursery program, and an elderly gentleman who sings bass with a voice like warm honey. The Christmas concert has become an annual tradition that the whole community looks forward to. I'm still helping with the books, though. We have better oversight now, and a clear chain of authorization for any expenditures. Frank and I have been seeing each other for 3 months now, taking things slowly, two people who understand that second chances are precious and not to be rushed. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I think about the receipt I found wedged between pages of Margie's choir folder, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd just looked the other way. If I'd convinced myself it was none of my business, or that the missing money would work itself out somehow. But then I think about the family comfort room at the hospital, with its soft chairs and quiet space for parents to rest while their children fight for their lives. I think about the plaque on the wall, acknowledging our choir's contribution, and about the families who have found comfort in that room over the past year. Sometimes the hardest thing about friendship is caring enough to hold each other accountable, even when it's painful, even when it risks everything. This is a dramatized story created for entertainment and inspiration, not medical, legal, or financial advice.